To find out why, I asked Labour MP Jeremy Corbyn.
Now, William Hague said in Parliament that Britain supports the rights of freedom of assembly and freedom of expression in Bahrain, but I've personally seen peaceful protests broken up by shotgun fire and tear gas. What's the truth here?
William Hague has made statements in Parliament in response to questions from me about Bahrain, in which he said he supports the right of free assembly, he supports the right of demonstration, supports the right of a free press. The reality is that no significant pressure has been put on the Bahrain government at all. There's been no sanctions against the Bahrain administration. There's been no suspension of trade. And even if the continued suspension of arms sales goes on, it doesn't make an awful lot of difference, because the Bahrain army is so well equipped and so well resourced, it doesn't need any more at the present time. I think the real interest is that Britain wants to maintain the status quo in Bahrain.
Even as I witnessed the regime's atrocities in Bahrain, the Foreign Minister, William Hague, pointedly avoided criticising Bahrain at a major conference on human rights.
In the last 4 weeks, you have seen a very sinister turn towards fascism in the world. And it's exemplified by Hillary Clinton, who has stated that the Bahraini government has the right to invite in foreign troops to do the dirty killing of the people. Now, William Hague is supporting that. He is supporting that. He hasn't got the courage to stand up and say, do you know that the Bahraini ambassador is in fact the man who's been organising the torture? He did it from 2007 onwards. He was head of security, and I've said to his face that you are a torturer, and in due course we'll arraign you before a criminal court and we'll have you for your torture. It may take time, these things can take years or even decades, but we will get him and his cronies and his father and his relatives, because they are corrupt and they're fascist and they're torturing. But the UK government is supporting these people, and the UK government is on the wrong side of history. It's quite disgraceful, but I'm afraid, face up to the facts, that's the situation at this moment.
There's a real sense of silence from the British establishment about Bahrain. The BBC won't talk to us, the Foreign Office certainly won't talk to us. It's as if Bahrain just isn't an issue in Britain.
Usually the media follows the official lines of those governments, and as we have seen in the past few weeks, the Western governments, especially the United States and the UK, have not been active in taking measures to stop the atrocities being committed in Bahrain, and they have preferred to keep the Bahraini affairs behind, because they know that if there is going to be a change in Bahrain, then the rest of the Gulf will also need to change, because, as you know, the Gulf has been under hereditary dictatorships for decades, and I think it is time for that state of affairs to change, and Western governments are apparently in collusion with those regimes to remain as they are in return for economic and strategic benefits.
Liberal peer Lord Avebury has campaigned against human rights abuses in Bahrain for decades. So what does he think?
If the relationship between Britain and Bahrain is so close, then why has there been such limited media coverage of the events in Bahrain here?
Well, that's a good question, because, I mean, as things have got steadily worse, you would have expected that, considering that the government is in favour of doing something about human rights everywhere in the world, there would have been some vigorous discussion in Parliament, in the media and so on. Whereas in fact, I mean, out of the whole region, you see Bahrain is more or less ignored. Syria, Yemen, North Africa, there's been discussion in all of the countries where unrest and disorder has erupted since the Arab Spring. But Bahrain, it seems for some reason, is kept in a backwater, and one can only assume that the government and the media don't think it's very important. Partly a question of size, of course, in comparison with the other countries, but partly also, you may think, because these friendly relations that we've already had in the past mean that we don't want to do anything that will upset the rulers, including any criticisms of them for the gross violations of human rights, of freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, detention without trial, arbitrary execution, you name it. I mean, just about everything in the category of human rights which is contained in the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, they've broken, and it's getting steadily worse.
So are Mr. Haig's words just empty rhetoric?
So far they have been empty rhetoric, and we have seminars roughly every 6 months in Parliament to draw attention to the human rights issues. We always issue reports on those, and we send them obviously to the Foreign Office ministers and to the Human Rights Parliamentary Group. So we try and get them raised, but until now we have not, I must say, been very successful. Well, you know about Mr. Haig's statement, which was in support of general human rights, such as rights of freedom of assembly. But when you come to particular issues like the arrests of journalists and so on, we don't hear a word from him, nor do we hear from Alistair Burt, who's the minister in charge of the region.
Essentially, you know, Bahrain has been an ally of Britain for over 100 years, and you know, the US in particular has its naval base to protect there, so they have not been as outspoken as they would be if these events were happening somewhere else.
So effectively, has the Bahraini government got a free pass to do what it wants?
I think the Bahraini government still needs to keep an eye on international opinion. They do still, you know, they still need foreign allies. It's a small country. They do depend partly on the US for their security, as all the small Gulf states do. I think they also have to think about their ability to attract foreign investment, because the economy is quite dependent on the banking sector, the presence of foreign companies, and certainly what's happened this year is not going to be at all good for that investment. However, Bahrain does seem to have become even closer than usual to Saudi Arabia this year. It does have increased financial aid to the GCC. It's obviously got the troops there. So I think it's moved a little bit further away from the West, a little bit closer to Saudi.
When we started our uprising, we were not relying on the Americans, we were not relying on the West. We just want them, one thing from them is to take a neutral position. We have a dictators here. We are in a region ruled by tribal dictators. And we are fighting for democracy. We're fighting for human rights. We're fighting for an elected government and a constitution that is written by people. There's no justification for any country to support this regime in cracking down and uprising calling for democracy, especially from Western countries who talks about human rights values and democratic principles, and you see them having a different eye, or they look at the situation in a different angle, or having a double standard foreign policy. Not the Saudis, not the Bahrain, not the GCC will let people go back home unless and until those demands are achieved. Otherwise, things is not going to be stable. With their tank, with their airplane, with their arms, they can silence it for some time, but they cannot silence it forever.
The silence from the corridors of power is echoed in Britain's state-funded media. When I was in Bahrain, many Bahrainis complained to me that BBC Arabic and BBC World, both funded by the Foreign Office, were ignoring their plight. I wanted to find out why, but the BBC refused to answer my many requests for an interview.
Why is the media here in the UK so relatively silent about the human rights abuses in Bahrain?
Well, the media in this country has become more pliant and more in tune with government thinking over the years, because there is more competition in the media, there is less money spent on news gathering by each individual channel, there's far less research done, there's far less in-depth, insightful programmes about places, so they tend to live on press handouts, live on media events. And the British government has quite clearly steered the media away from Bahrain, steered them away from any discussion about human rights in Saudi Arabia, done a great deal to support arms exports to both of those countries, and steered the whole media in the direction of the Libya story. And so the media are generally cheerleaders for the government's view on Libya at the present time.
The British media is not independent, and I don't think it ever has been. There's a great change going on as regards to the media. The main television media in this country and the United States and the newspapers are losing out to the alternative media. And one of the reasons is that the main media are a bunch of liars, and they do it quite subtly, usually by omission. But the fact of the matter is that they in a profound way, they reflect the desires of a political establishment.
The BBC have refused all our requests for an interview, but the consequences of its silence are clear. When even politicians can complain they don't understand the true horror of the situation in Bahrain, then something terribly wrong has happened to the media here in the UK.